And we're back in the studio again. And
Yes, we are.
unfortunately, Jason couldn't meet us, but I said that on purpose to see if, give everybody a second to guess on which Jason.
It'll make it a little bit easier too, right? Logistically today.
Yeah. No, unfortunately, Jason Thompson had something come up today and wasn't able to join us. But I wanted to make sure we wrapped up this series with you. So over the last couple weeks, you've been gracious in giving us your time to focus on optimization programs and A/B testing
Yeah,
and A/B testing tools and whatnot.
that's been a lot of
So
fun.
yeah, it's been great, and we'll make sure to have you back again. So as I was saying, like, want to kind of put a bow on this series today.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Cool, cool. All right. So we're just gonna jump right into it today and keep this conversation going. Um, so over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about things like what to do when launching an A/B testing program or
Hmm.
introducing a new tool, the things not to do. Last week we spoke about the importance of integrating analytics and the optimization
Yeah,
program.
yeah.
Today, I want to get really, really nuancy and talk about something that you talk a lot about internally when it comes to running an optimization
Hmm.
program, and that is a test hypothesis.
Yep, yep.
So, the question I have for you today is how do you build a proper test hypothesis? Um, and why is it so important? I
Yeah.
know one of the things people talk about is the important or a measure of success for an optimization program is high testing velocity. Um, but and I know our conversations too. I'm just kind of unloading a bunch here for us to unpack.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, a lot of our conversations, one of the fallbacks of focusing on high velocity, other parts of the optimization program start to suffer, and one of
Certainly.
which is the test hypothesis. Correct?
Yeah, correct. And Jim, so and like we'll take a step back and look bigger picture, but yeah, we've talked about process. It's so important. And one of the things that I've seen happen to programs that chase velocity, and again, I don't have anything against running, a high volume of tests as long as the process is in place. So what I have seen directly, like experience either working with clients or even working on the client side myself is let's just call it a test brief, right? It's a test plan. So for every A/B test or optimization test or personalization test we run on the site, we want to have a test brief in place. It's a test plan. It could be a one-page document. It could be a couple-page PowerPoint slide. It doesn't matter. But in that test brief or test plan, you're going to have the hypothesis. And so, if you're running a program and you're running it, too fast, as compared to like the resources you have to keep it up, and you lose parts of this process up front, like getting the test plan, a proper test brief in place, a proper test hypothesis, you're going to start to see poor results not only in your ideation and on the site, but also when you go to read out results. It's things aren't going to make sense. You're not going to have results that are tied to what we initially thought we were testing and things like that. So we'll get into some of the details. I'll try not to make it like a major stats class today. We won't get too weedsy as far as the technical details go, but certainly, and this is really good because we've been talking about optimization programs that are just starting up. This is great for an optimization program that's just starting up. Really understanding what's a hypothesis, why do we test a hypothesis, what does that mean? So yeah, so this is great. This is an awesome topic to end with, for sure. And so I just, we'll take a step back, big picture, and just say, what's a hypothesis, like outside of testing? And, basically a hypothesis is just, it's an assumption made for the sake of an argument, right? It's based on limited evidence. And that's kind of what a hypothesis is. And the example I like to use with clients is, because I think, I don't think we all have dogs, but we're all pet owners. And, is like my dog can fetch more dog balls than your dog, right? That's my hypothesis. That's my argument. My assumption is that my dog can catch more balls than your dog. And so, what do we have going on there? If we break that statement down, we're going to have like some variables, like from a testing standpoint, if we geek out a little bit. The variables are the first one's dog breed. So I have a Rottweiler, you have a Labrador Retriever, right? So that's our first variable. And we're going to say, okay, we want to test these two breeds against each other and see which one fetches the most balls. And so the second variable is our fetch rate. And on sites for, getting it back to like digital web properties, that could be our conversion rate, could be a click-through rate, some sort of rate that we want to measure. So we're going to say, okay, my hypothesis is my dog Finn, he's a Rottweiler. He can fetch more balls than your dog Fido. He's a golden retriever, and so so that's our hypothesis, right? And that's what we want to test. So for every A/B test, you really want to make it that specific. You need to be very clear up front in what you're testing. Um, so I won't necessarily get into like what a null hypothesis is as compared to the hypothesis, but if you're an optimization program starting up, I highly recommend that your optimization manager, your analyst, dig back into stats, really understand like what's a null hypothesis. Because the null hypothesis is really what we're testing. And the null hypothesis just says there's no difference between fetch rates between the dogs, right? That's our null hypothesis. Um, so yeah, just a great example, right, around a hypothesis, just in a real world example. Yeah, you have some fun with it when you think it through a little bit, but take that analogy and apply it to testing. It can be pretty powerful up front in just how you actually develop that hypothesis. So I know I threw a lot out there,
Mm-hmm.
real quick.
No. That's it. Seems like that's how we're starting this episode off. So the first thing I get into, and you know, I do this with Jason Thompson all the time, is kind of throw the counter argument out there.
Mm-hmm.
So as you be going through just the concepts of a hypothesis and um, what goes into it and the idea behind it, the first thing I come to, and again, a lot of it has to deal with the sales of a lot of these various tools of, like the WYSIWYG editor, and you can go in and just make little changes here and make little changes there and just see what happens. Um, what would you say to someone that says, okay, that's great and all, yeah, we want to do that for more complex tests, but we also just want to go in and play around and try out, like, why do we need a test hypothesis for just a simple change, a color change on a button? That's kind of like our out of the box example, or more of the basic changes. We'll implement a hypothesis as part of the process for more complex tests.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, if you're going to do it I think it needs to be consistent, right? It's first of all, it just gets your team in the practice of making consistent, so it's never forgotten. But when you think about a hypothesis, there's a statistical component to it, right? Why do we have a hypothesis? We have a hypothesis because we have a limited sample size, right? So our hypothesis is based upon a limited sample size. So if I personally want to make any changes to my website, I want to make sure those changes are backed by statistically significant data, right? So the whole scientific rigor behind testing a hypothesis is we want enough sample size. So, we want enough traffic to the site. We want enough traffic to each product detail page so that we can eventually at some point, get to a point where we can say, we have enough sample size here to say at a 95% confidence level, if we change the button color to green, we're going to see an increase in add to cart clicks, right? So it all ties back to that hypothesis. If it's not there, what we do see some testing programs do is say, oh crap, like the color, but the button color change didn't do anything. Oh, but this other metric over here, it drove like a lot of conversion increases, right? So you get really you lose focus in what the test is even supposed to do. So even for a simple test, whether it's a button color change, it could be a headline change for an article. Maybe you're testing 2 or 3 headline changes for an article. But you really have to have that hypothesis nailed down so that when you look at the stats on the back end, it makes a lot of sense. And then also, you're always taking your results to your senior leadership team. That's the team that's providing funding. That's the team that's providing advocacy for the program, and you need them on board. And if you consistently bring them, here's the hypothesis. boom. I mean, your result readout could literally be a couple minutes for each test, right? Here's our hypothesis. We said that changing the button color from orange to green on a product decap is going to drive an increase in conversions. And this was the result. Boom, boom. It's all tied together, right? So it makes sense. It's consistent. The way you approach it, it's scientific, and the way you read out, it's just a consistent process, and there's really no questions about it. And honestly, your senior leadership team doesn't want to get into the details or the weeds behind the stats, but they do want to know that there's some rigor behind the program, right? So, if you come out of the gate as a new optimization program manager, Jim, I hand you this. We're at like a sporting retail company or something. I hand you the optimization program, and you come back to me a month later and say, okay, here's our first 5 tests, and this is the hypothesis, and this is how we're going to measure it. That's awesome, right? If you came to me and said, okay, I got these 5 test ideas and let's just see what happens, I don't know if I'm going to take your work to my CEO or the board of directors or the senior leadership team, because I don't know if I would have the confidence, in that process.
I like how you talked about bringing rigor there and using that to instill confidence in the management team. Because I mean, I may have the wrong impression, but at least my impression is that there is a general consensus out there that testing tools enable us to do things on the fly, test on the
Sure.
fly,
Yeah.
which can give the impression of just kind of winging it. Am I
Yeah.
wrong?
No, no, you're spot on, and so the danger there is, yeah, testing on the fly could be really fun, but if there's no rigor behind it, how do you know you're not how do you know you're not negatively in impacting a down funnel metric, right? So you're doing all these fun tests on the fly, right? Maybe in a silo even, and you have your data team over here making monthly readouts based upon key metrics on the site, and all of a sudden, oh, how do we explain this drop in visits or this drop in add to cart clicks or product views or subscriptions? How do we explain it? And oh yeah, we got Jason over there. He's been just kind of running tests for fun over the past month or two, right? So there's no rigor there. Versus I could say, oh hey, we had a drop in conversion rate, and this is why it was, or we had a spike in conversion rate. Better yet, right? Look on the positive. We had a spike in conversion rate, and it was from these 2 tests over here that we were running on the site. So yeah, I mean, the rigor has to be there. Hypothesis. I mean, it is all about stats. I've been in a couple meetings where I was in a job interview many years ago, and one of the questions asked is, "What's a type 1 error?" Right? um, and that's all around statistics and your hypothesis and measurement. And as an optimization manager or a director or program director, you may go in there, and one of your senior leaders may say, I was talking about our testing program to someone the other day, and they asked me about a type 1 error, and I don't even know what that means. But do we take that into account, right? And for everyone out there, a type 1 error is basically saying, let's say we have 2 variants. We've got our control product detail page, and we're running a test on like version B. A type 1 error would say, oh, like version B had an impact when it really didn't. So that's scary, right? Like version B had an impact. We're gonna push the green button color, but it really didn't have an impact because we didn't have a big enough sample size, right? Which all ties back to the hypothesis. The hypothesis says it's based on a limited sample size. So again, like especially for programs just starting up, have your optimization manager, have the analyst dig into. You can easily find basic stat sites out there that go through hypothesis testing specifically, and even around A/B testing. And I have seen some more advanced programs where they have they have a data science team that, they're looking even beyond what we're talking about today. They're looking at like covariance and things like that. So that rigor and understanding those basic stats definitions, that's important because you're trying to instill confidence in whether it's your manager or their manager, and you're trying to instill confidence in the program, right? And if like most people I work with enjoy optimization, I think we talked about it, I don't know, maybe last week or something, but it's fun. It's like optimization groups are usually fun. So if you're having a lot of fun at work and you want to keep your program running, the the people that you're giving your output to, which are your test results and your test learnings, they have to have faith and confidence and trust in what you're doing is sound, right? And if the rigor's not behind there, it's going to be a not a good win situation for sure.
Yeah. And I did think about a couple of the instances where we talked about like the gamification of
Yeah,
this
yeah.
and making this fun. What would you say to someone who would say adding this kind of process slows things down, or adds undue burden, which removes the exciting possibilities of testing?
Yeah, I mean, I would first say like adding a hypothesis is not going to slow things down, right? So, a hypothesis really should, if you know what you're testing and you know what your result should be, it takes maybe 10, 20 minutes of strategic thinking to really think through the hypothesis, and maybe you want to share that out and get some feedback to make sure everybody's on the same page. And the better you get at it, the quicker it's going to go. So that's a small part of it. But the gamification kind of comes in more. It's almost like more on the front and the back end of the process, right? Gamification could be, on the front end for test ideas that come in, have everyone vote on the test idea, right? And then collect those votes every month, and then keep score and say, oh yeah, this month or year to date, we're 6 months in, and Jim's got like a 50% win ratio for the test he thinks are going to win, right? And then on the back end for results, I worked with a large retailer, and this was really fun. Like every month, we had an executive readout to the vice president of e-commerce, and each of the directors had a revenue associated each month with their A/B testing from the ideas that came through their team, right? So it's kind of fun. It's like, oh, like I got $5 million in revenue from test launch this year, and then your peers like, oh my god, I only got 2.7. I gotta like figure this out, right? So you're gonna go back into your team and say, hey, let's we can't let the product merchandise team beat us from like test ideation and results. Let's go clobber them. So that's kind of like some of the gamification you can get into. The more engaged you can keep people in the process, the more skin they have in the game. Sometimes skin is just, we're all competitive for the most part. Like we all have competitive natures, and we want to have some fun at work. And we want to win, maybe throw in like a little prize for someone who picks the most test winners or comes up with the best test hypothesis. There's lots you can do around gamification to make it fun. But I certainly wouldn't say like, including a hypothesis or getting that statistical rigor behind the program would slow you down. If anything, it should speed you up down the road, because you'll have everything syncing, and you won't get those questions. You won't have to go back and re-engineer how you're doing your test plans.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, especially on the, it could help you actually move faster, rather than slow you down.
Yeah, and,
Uh,
and Jim, I mean, it's a really good point you bring up. I worked with a client a couple of years ago, and I lived and worked through the experience of them increasing their test velocity from X number of tests a week to Y number of tests a week, and it was a pretty big jump. But I also saw some things fall out of the process, the test brief specifically. Like, I don't know how you have a testing program without documenting. Here's what we're testing. Here's the primary KPI. Here's what we're measuring. Here's how we know if it's successful or not. And like, here's a design. Like you need that. So I mean, it's a really good point you bring up.
yeah. So let's dig into the details a bit. What, when you're building out a test hypothesis, and this is part of your test ideation, creation, deployment process, what are the key components of it, or what are the key steps that you take when building it out?
Sure. The first thing you want to know is, what are your variables? Like, what are you testing? So, what are you going to test, and what are you testing that against? So, what are you going to measure it against? So, in the example of the dogs earlier, right? It's my variables are dog breed, right? And I'm testing it against fetch rate. So, I would recommend for any optimization program out there, whether you're just starting out or even if you've been doing this for years, is um, really understand for the page that you're testing on, let's say I'm testing on my search results page. You want to know what the purpose of that page is, right? I'm not necessarily sure, and I may get some argument or pushback here from people. I'm not necessarily sure the direct purpose of a search results page is to increase revenue. Um, so especially from an A/B testing point, I think it's too far down funnel from revenue, right? So if I'm testing on the search results page, I want to know, did I get someone to click further into the funnel, right? So I got search results, and instead of showing 3, we want to show 10, right? So our variable is number of search results shown on each page. The result is click-throughs to a product page. So that's our conversion rate. So the hypothesis simply is, we believe, a lot of hypotheses you'll hear, they call we believes. We believe showing 10 search results versus 3 search results will drive an increase in product views, product page views. Simple as that. So break down your variables, what you're going to change in your test, and know what specifically you're measuring against. And each page on your site, your homepage, your success measure may be promotional product ads, right? Because we're doing a lot of promotions on our homepage. Your checkout success measure is going to be order rate. They get to check out how many actually convert and purchase. So really have your team think through, for each page type, what are we really measuring here? What's important? And you may get some good conversations with the product owners in the business around those page type purposes, right? But those are good discussions to have. If anything, it gets people more engaged in your process, which is really what you want.
When you're thinking these through, like, do you have a metric or measure that, like, how do I want to phrase this, is kind of like the one above all else, like, or are there like a selection of things that you go to, or is it all dependent upon what the test is?
Yeah, I think it's all dependent upon what the test is, really. I think you're going to do your program a lot of harm if every test is measured against conversion rate. And when I say conversion rate, I'm specifically meaning order rate. So all the way down funnel. Now that being said, I think for every test you run, we also in the test brief, which is why the rigor of the process is so important. In the test brief, you're going to list secondary metrics and tertiary metrics, right? So these are metrics that we're interested in, but we're not actually going to put in the hypothesis, right? Because we don't really think changing 10 search results from 3 to 10 is going to necessarily drive a significant increase in revenue. We do think it's going to drive a significant increase in product views. So yeah, I definitely say it's each page type that you're testing against. Think it from that standpoint, because you just can't tie everything to order rate and revenue. You'll see a lot of you I think you won't see as many test winners, right? And because not everything's going to push the dial on revenue. But what that will lead to is what we call an iterative testing process, which is really best in class, right? So you run a test on the search results page. We found out, oh, showing 10 is better than 3. Now we get on the product page. Well, why aren't we seeing those products being purchased at a higher rate? Now you look at the product page, and then you just kind of walk down your funnel. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah. So when you, yeah, totally, totally. By the way, definitely makes sense, and that was kind of the what I was getting at with that was is like, the people that always focus on like that one thing. So, but when you going back to what you mentioned a couple minutes ago about the we believe, we
Hmm.
believe this is going to happen, that's going to happen. Do you also typically put in the inverse of what should not happen or what would make the test, lack of a better term, a failure?
Yeah.
Well, we believe this is going to happen. We do not expect or do not want this to happen. Do you have like that inverse?
Yeah, it's not necessarily an inverse hypothesis because that would be your null hypothesis, but it's more we call it a do no harm. So if I'm testing on the search results page and I drove a 15% increase in product detail page views, and I did not harm revenue or order rate, then that's perfect. So yeah, in a test brief, it's always good to put, you know, we don't want to do any harm to these metrics, right? Um, and I mean, I've seen some tests run where the company, they just liked how the new design looked. They all liked it; it looked better. So they still want to test it to make sure they're not going to lose revenue or anything. So that's what we call just a do no harm test. Put the sleek design versus the old design. We don't see a lot of like upticks in our major metrics, but it's not hurting. It's not doing any damage to our order rate or a revenue rate or add to cart rate. So yeah, that's a really good point about like ensuring that you're not doing damage to downstream metrics, especially when you go into these senior leadership meetings, these executive meetings, they're it's a revenue, most of them, it's a revenue driven, right? Or subscription driven, or whatever that bottom line is that the company's really driving towards. So you need to be able to handle those discussions as well.
Yeah, and I like how you do keep bringing it back to senior leadership in the organization, and making it something that they buy into. And as I've been hearing you talk, it definitely sounds like this is one of those key things that you flat out said at the beginning. This is the group that funds this, this team, this
Yeah,
tool, all of that. Getting them to buy in, and showing them that there's rigor and there's planning, and it's not just a playground
yeah.
for people to go play with.
Yeah, and Jim, as you were going through that, I mean, the rigor is going to lead to more results too, to better results. So, if you have that rigor in place, it really will lead to better test ideas down the road, better test hypothesis, better results. Yeah. So even from like a bottom line results, you'll get there. You'll definitely get there.
Mm-hmm. One, I have one final question, and then we can
Sure.
just kind of start to wrap things up. We're gonna
That sounds good.
wrap things up a little quicker this week. We could wrap up with like any kind of final thoughts or anything you thought we missed. But before we get there, like what do you see happen, or what have you seen happen when this part of the process is neglected?
Like specifically around the test hypothesis.
Yeah, like this component of the test planning, or even just test planning in general. Like when people start to neglect it, or maybe they start to put this in place, but then they kind of fall into the trap of, oh, this is one little test. I could just do this without this kind of step, which kind of leads to a crack in the process. When
Yeah.
when when organizations start to neglect it, what have you seen happen?
I mean, I've seen transparency kind of go down between these
Ooh, I like
these results readouts and what really they were trying to do, because you're going to get asked the question, well, what was our original plan here, right? Like, I know we wanted to drive add to cards, but we're seeing this change. Like, what do we really measure against? You're going to get those questions, and if you don't have an answer, it's not going to be a good thing. And I think the other big part is you're going to see some, I'll just say, decreased engagement from your organization. And what I mean by that is, if I'm running the program and I develop a test brief, and Jim, you're the product owner, and you're responsible for a certain part of the site, I'm going to come to you and say, Jim, here's what I'm thinking. Um, I took your idea, I put this plan together, give me your feedback, right? That keeps you engaged in the process. That lets you know that the time you spent coming up with a test hypothesis or ideating is valuable. And I'm showing you that, right? And then, you know, does this look right to you, Jim? What do you want to change in this test brief, right? And then you just keep a documentation of that test brief, you know, just put it in a wiki site somewhere on Confluence, so somewhere where the organization has shared repository. And then, 3 years down the road, and we had an internal discussion at 33 Sticks about this. 3 years down the road, we're going to say, oh, wait, didn't we run the button color test? Yeah, that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Boom. Oh, yeah, I just go on the Confluence. Here's a test brief. Oh, yeah, but, you know, it's all there, right? Everything's there. You got consistency. And you can look back and say, oh, this was a sound test, and this is how we're going to do it this way. So there's kind of multiple upsides to making sure it's in place.
Hmm. Yeah, and I love the transparency aspect that you bring
Mm.
up. That was something I hadn't thought about. Where it does it makes it very open for others to see what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, and not just like your executive team. They don't necessarily want to know all the details, but they also don't want to think of your program as a black box, right? Because you have a tool, a very powerful tool that can change the site very easily.
Yes,
But
but I
really,
immediately
like,
think of the development team.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And but really where like a lot of testing programs take off is at the test ideation phase, right? And getting people to buy in, and sharing the process along the way at certain points, sharing the test brief with the person who submitted the test idea. Yeah, all just transparency is key for
Mhm.
sure.
All right. Well, this has been a great series of episodes. Very interesting topic today. Like I think it's
Yeah.
again process. Has been your main theme throughout it, and I've always felt like testing tools can be seen as a way of getting around process, or again, like we talked about at the beginning of this one, just kind of operating on the fly. So again, appreciate your time the last couple of weeks in joining us. It's been a lot of fun. As we wrap up, like any final thoughts on this topic or anything we've discussed, anything else you'd like to share?
I just, if you're running an optimization program out there, just keep up to date with changes in the marketplace because this space changes pretty quickly. Um, the way pages are developed and sites are developed these days, and the processes around there, you really need to be up to speed on the latest like tools and processes, and that's how you're going to make sure your optimization program continues to stay relevant. So
Hmm.
I'm always trying to learn and trying to get better at things, whether it's the piano or playing fetch with the fan out back. So yeah, just keep learning.
Great, great, great perspective. So Jason, again, thank you much. It's been great. So let's call it there, and we'll talk to everybody later.
Awesome, so much fun, Jim. Thanks for
Yep,
having me on these past bunch of weeks. It's been a blast.
you got it. You got
All
it.
right,
All right, catch you later.
all right,
Bye.
sounds good. Bye.